Welcome back to episode 5 of Breaking the Cycle of Gang Violence. If you haven't watched the first 4 episodes, we definitely recommend that you check those out. They are online right now for you to stream. We're going to start today by letting Joe introduce us to today's guest.
Okay, this week I'm honored to introduce Kern County District Attorney Cynthia Zimmer. Cynthia Zimmer is a Central Valley native from Coalinga, California. She holds a bachelor's in political science from Cal State University Bakersfield, her Juris Doctorate from Loyola Law School. She has been a prosecutor for over 35 years in Kern County. For 20 years, she was supervising district attorney, and the last 12 years, she was supervising the gang unit. In 2018, she was elected Kern County District Attorney, and she took office in January of 2019. Cynthia, thank you so much for being here. We're so happy you're here.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Perfect. So we're going to dive right in, and I want to talk about, just for people who maybe don't know the process, once a case gets to you, what happens?
Our job as district attorney is to do justice. And we do a little bit more than just look at cases that are brought to us. But when a law enforcement agency makes an arrest or is looking for someone that's wanted and wants charges on that person who is outstanding, we accept police reports from law enforcement agencies and review those and determine whether charges should be filed. And we look to see whether a crime's been committed and whether we can prove it in court. And we use the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt.
And I want to talk a little bit about how you make, and this is a complex question, I understand, how do you make the decision what to charge and when to actually charge?
Well, we're very knowledgeable about all the charging sections, most importantly, the penal code. And we have a lot of experience. We know what we're looking for. We know what can be proved. And so we read the police report, and if we see that there are sufficient facts to support a charge, we will file that charge and then go to court and see what happens.
And I know I've been learning a little bit through this podcast about gang enhancements, specifically charges that are gang enhancements. Can you talk about those and how that works? I don't know anything about that process.
In 1988, the California legislature passed the STEP Act. That's the Street Terrorism Act. That was a direct result of the huge escalation of gang violence in the late 80s in Los Angeles. We in Kern County did not use the STEP Act too much until about just before the year 2000, I believe, is when we saw the explosion of gang violence, even though it's always been around. But to be able to satisfy the requirements of the statute, that's about when we started in the year 2000. But the STEP Act provides enhanced penalties in a number of areas that relate to gang violence. It establishes a gang enhancement. That is a special charge or enhancement that you can put on certain crimes that increases the penalty. Like if you have a robbery of a liquor store, if it is not a gang crime, that carries 2, 3, or 5 years. But with a gang enhancement, it can be 15 years because there is strength in numbers, and with numbers, there's more dangerousness as part of the concept. It's not just gang enhancements, though, that the STEP Act allowed. It also allowed a special circumstance that goes along with a homicide. If you have a first-degree murder and it was for the benefit of a criminal street gang, that qualifies the convicted person of life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. So we call that gang murder. So gang murder is a special circumstance. That's also in the STEP Act. In addition, there's something else called vicarious liability for guns. Under the law, normally, if it's not a gang crime, if someone uses a gun and personally fires it, there's a large enhancement that goes along with that. But if you are involved in a gang crime, not only the person that fires it, but the aiders and abettors are convicted of the gang enhancement. So about 3 or 4 things that we talk about in the STEP Act that apply to only gang crimes. And I've talked about 3 of the 4 of those.
And you mentioned briefly that the gang enhancement only applies to certain crimes. So you mentioned robbery, murder, firing a weapon. Are there other ones that you know off the top of your
Yes, it applies to about 33 different crimes. Okay. They used to call them the Dirty 30, and now they're the Dirty 33. But like you wouldn't use a gang enhancement on simple possession of methamphetamine, but that's a misdemeanor now. So no gang enhancements apply on misdemeanors. Well, not the ones we use anyway. But what we usually look for are witness intimidation, murder, sometimes rape, depending on if that's an initiation crime, rape, robbery, residential burglary, gun possession, the types of crimes that you see that go with gang violence are the types of crimes. Sometimes financial crimes can actually qualify for a gang enhancement if people are involved in a group forgery, things like that.
I want to talk to you about your time too, about supervising the district attorney's gang unit. Can you talk about, just in general, about that time, maybe what you learned, what you took away from it, or the different perspective you have now?
It was during that time, the beginning of my time in the gang unit. Now, I've handled gang crimes over the year as a non-supervisor when I was in the major vendor narcotics unit in the late 80s. We saw gang crime, but we didn't call it gang crime, and we really weren't able to prosecute people under the STEP Act in those days because we just couldn't qualify for the statute. It's not that easy to prove a gang enhancement or a gang crime because of the various steps. But so I was somewhat familiar, especially the trafficking of narcotics. But I became the game supervisor in 2006 when we saw a huge escalation in Kern County in gang crime, and we needed to put more resources in that area. We saw a real increase in the number of homicides, and that has just continued to increase through 2019, in which for the last 4 years, Kern County has been the number one county in California for per capita homicides. Unfortunately, we bear that horrific distinction.
And I know Joe has mentioned off camera before that was a big part of working with Delano PD. He spoke specifically about the district attorney's office working with that. Do you want to kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so it was interesting when you said earlier about the STEP Act that they weren't really being investigated as gang crimes, because I'm kind of a historian of Delano crime, and I mean, I know gangs been around from the 70s, 80s, 90s, but in Delano, they weren't being documented at all. Like we had gang members that were in our system, but they were never they weren't documented as such. And it wasn't until, like you said, 2005 to 20 and on that we started seeing an inflection in the gang crimes. And the way Delano PD attacked it at the time is it was periodically. They send out a 2-man team. Okay, now you guys go combat gangs. They go out there and do it for 2 months. Okay, come back. We're going to street. So it wasn't a constant thing that was going on, or we were keeping them on their toes. We weren't documenting as much. And it wasn't until 2014 where we had, I think it was over 9 homicides in that year here in Delano, where us or our department created a gang unit, a full-time gang unit. And I was telling Jess that you were instrumental as far as the success of our unit, because you would send some of the deputy district attorneys down here to teach us how to do the gang enhancements. So that was major for us. And I think since 2014, we have been successful as far as prosecuting these gang crimes.
Thank you. I remember that year. It was just an explosion that year, and I think a lot of those crimes were not even solved that year. But after that, I know what we did work very hard with your department to talk about really testimony in court. How do you prove it?
Correct.
What are you looking for? What are the elements of the crime of a gang enhancement? What do you have to do? And it takes a lot of resources to start a gang department or a gang division within police departments. It's not easy, and you have to learn how to do it. But it's worth it.
I'm, as somebody who's, not working on either side that you guys are, what are those sorts of things that you had to learn or that you had to teach? Because to me, it doesn't seem that complex.
Yeah. When we go testify in court, we can't just say, oh, that person is a gang member.
Why not?
Because we have to prove that they were or they are a gang member at the time of the commission of the crime, and that the crime they committed was a benefit for that gang. So that's why we had to go back on their adult cases whether it be a field contact, another crime case where they're documented with another gang member, and it could even be what they're wearing, if they self-admitted. So all that stuff needs to be presented in court when we present a gang case to the judge.
The law allows an expert witness to give opinions. That's to be distinguished from a lay witness who's maybe a witness that'll come and say the car was blue. But a police officer can testify as an expert witness, but they have to have the sufficient knowledge, experience, and training in order to do that. And that is the first step. For an officer to even give an opinion that he believes a charged person is an active participant in a particular gang, he has to have the sufficient training and experience to be able to do that. That's not only street time, but that's also in training at schools and different things, because you have to understand the gang culture, and there's a lot to it. So it takes quite an initial investment.
Got it.
That's a lot of the preparation that goes into these cases, and is huge because we are studying the history, basically, of whatever gang you're testifying to be an expert for. So we learn the history, we learn who they are, who they've associated with. So all that is preparation, and for the most part, it has to be off the top of your head when you're testifying in court. You can refer to your notes, but for the most part, it's like before a gang case, we are studying, and it's like being almost in college to be able to testify as an expert.
Wow. It's very interesting. That's something I didn't realize went into it. I want to talk specifically, you guys talked about the time frame when things started to explode here. And specifically, I know Corey Johnson's case was a big case here in Kern County. Can you give maybe people, if they aren't familiar with the case, a little background, and then what made that case so complex?
It was a case, it was my first long gang case, and it turned out to be the longest gang case in Kern County history. It lasted almost 6 months and trial. But it was a case involving the Country Boy Crips, which is an African American gang in southeast Bakersfield, and it's a hard gang to penetrate. We don't get a lot of convictions against Country Boy Crips because they just the way they operate, they don't tell on each other and things like that. So it was a case against 3 people: Corey Johnson, Joseph Dixon, and David Lee, and they set out on a very deadly crime spree that went on for a few weeks, and they killed 3 people, nearly killed 3 others, paralyzed 1, shot at a number of people, intimidated people, and one of the defendants had only been out of prison for about 4 weeks from killing someone before he killed again, and one of the other defendants had killed someone as a juvenile. So it was a very difficult case. Witnesses were intimidated during the course of the case, and it just took a while. It really took a while because there were a number of crime scenes, and I guess the case really established Kern County as a jurisdiction that could handle very long, complicated cases, and the case made its way up to the California Supreme Court, who talked and wrote about the case in a published opinion affirming the conviction, and then it created some new law on conspiracy to participate in a criminal street gang, which was favorable to prosecutors and favorable to Kern County.
Wow. So it really changed the entire state.
Yes, and it was a good learning experience for me because I did that case, and so as a gang supervisor, I think it helped me teach others on how to deal with it. And it's hard. It's like a marathon when you're in a long case. My children I have twins, and they were juniors that year in high school. And I always say, because of Corey Johnson, I lost my children's junior year of high school. But I mean, of course, that's kind of a joke, but it is quite a commitment to do a long case as a peace officer and as a prosecutor, because there was someone that's a police officer from the police department that sat next to me during the entire trial and helped me.
Wow. That's a long time, too.
It is.
That's a long time. Because of how many cases you've seen over the years, have there been any patterns or themes that have emerged to you from what you've seen that has to do with gang violence?
Well, there are a lot of different kinds of gangs throughout Kern County. There are Hispanic gangs, African American gangs, white gangs. They're all a little bit different on the way they operate and some of the rules, but basically what is consistent is there is a gang culture, and there are certain philosophies that are consistent with every gang culture, and that is the concept of respect, disrespect, and retaliation. And there's what is consistent also is the sense of right and wrong. They know killing is wrong, but it's not really wrong to them in the gang culture because that is what they do. So that's a difficult concept, but it's consistent. And what else is consistent is we see these kids get younger and younger when they decide to take up a firearm, which is a firearm to a gang member is like a hammer to a carpenter. It is a necessary tool of the trade. And what is consistent is we see escalation of their crimes starting from when they are young people throughout juvenile court, see things like graffiti and school burglaries and things like that, and they escalate. And by the time they kill, usually they have a criminal history consistent with every gang.
And one of the things you mentioned earlier, specifically talking about the Country Boy Crips, but I think in general you may have seen throughout your years is the lack of people being willing to talk when it comes to gang crimes. I know Sergeant Nunez talked a little bit about that as well. Can you talk about the difficulty of that when you're dealing with a case?
Gang crimes have the highest rate of unsolvability, and the reason is because we can't get witnesses to come forward for a variety of reasons. Normal citizens, let's say non-gang citizens that see something, are afraid. Totally understandable. Yeah, I can understand that. They, especially in a community where people know each other, but it is the problem. And there's also a concept, and they refer to it as snitching. No snitching. Snitches get stitches. All the kind of vernacular that they use, but they informing to the police, cooperating with the police is a basic gang philosophy that you just do not do. So that's why it makes investigating these crimes so difficult, and also very often the victims of gang crimes are gang members themselves. So because that deals with retaliation, sometimes two gangs are just going at it. Sometimes you have very innocent victims, you do. But sometimes the victims themselves are fully ensconced in the philosophy, and their family members as well, and they won't cooperate.
I want to talk a little bit about that, about working with these victims' families, both, just an innocent victim or somebody who's maybe in a gang that has become a victim of a crime. Can you talk about what that's like to work with people?
Sure. It varies. Sometimes you have families that are completely cooperative, and it runs the gamut to sometimes that families of victims are completely uncooperative. In my experience, I have usually had a very cooperative relationship with a murder victim's mother. That's who comes to court. That's who cares, is the victim's mother. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but in with my caseload, that has been the case, and they are there every day. They are there. That is especially true if that mother is not a witness. If she is there because she wasn't at the scene. When you have family members who have information, who saw something, then the level of cooperation starts to decline. But families that aren't involved and can't see anything are usually cooperative. They're grief-stricken. They hate that it happened. A lot of them carry some guilt that maybe if they had done a better job with their kids, they wouldn't have gone down that road and been at the wrong place at the wrong time. I had a situation in Corey Johnson, one of the defendants that was convicted in that case. The family of that particular defendant came to court, and then about 2 years later, another family member was murdered. So in my first case, they were relatives of the defendant. And then 2 years were another huge murder case that I did. They were relatives of the victim. So I brought him into my office and I said, look, I imagine you don't like me too much because I convicted your nephew, your grandson, and he's doing the rest of his life in prison. Are you uncomfortable? Because I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable to talk to me if I prosecute the person that killed your other family member. And they said to me something that I'll always remember to say, no, you're professional. You did a great job. We want you. So we kind of came to an understanding, even though I know they were hurt about what happened in the first case, but we got along just fine. They were completely cooperative, supportive. One of the relatives, when I see her throughout the community, we have a great relationship, and it was an honor to be able to represent that family in getting a conviction of the brutal murder of their loved one.
Wow. What a unique position to be put in, never having assumed that you would be put in that position as well.
It was odd, and I didn't grow up in a community in which I was really knew much about the gang culture, and I'm a little on the older side as far as being a prosecutor. So you just wonder, how is this family going to deal with me? But over the years, you develop the ability to talk to victims, in which you know how to talk to them. So do peace officers are better at it than we are. That you can just relate to them, and one of the things that we make sure that they know is that we care about what happened to their family, and we want to seek and get justice for them.
How do you deal with that? Because you said it is so hard to actually get a verdict or get a case solved when it has to do with gangs, because people are so either afraid or unwilling to talk. How do you deal with those victims' families?
Well, the police start that. The police are our heroes out in the field where they deal with the family. They develop an honest relationship with them where we have to be honest about, what's going on. Not tell them everything that happened in the case, but have an honest discussion with them about coming to court. And then there are things that we do tell them that we can do for them. There are things like, if you know something about a crime, you don't necessarily have to be a witness, but you can call secret witness and give information. We also have a program in which we can, witness protection program, in which we move people. We can move people across town, out of state, and help them have a new start if they testify, and give them a new life. And it's been very successful for a number of eyewitnesses and victims. So there are a lot of things that the legislature, the state, and law enforcement have done to help us help witnesses talk about what happened and start a new life.
Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I'm not familiar with it, and obviously we don't have to go into specifics of where do they go, but in general, how does that process start? If somebody is afraid to come forward but does have information that would help a case, where do they go, and then what happens?
Well, a lot of different things. They can call secret witness if they don't even want to have contact with law enforcement, 322-4040. Call. We've had tremendous success with secret witness. If you just call secret witness and direct us in the direction of a suspect. Like I had a case in which there was a homicide out in Rosamond in, a month before 9/11. It was a long time ago. And we had no clues, no suspects. A woman at the McDonald's was murdered during a robbery. And so no clues, no suspects, but some evidence was gathered. Several years later, someone called secret witness because one of those killers was drunk and bragging that he had done it, and described some details about what he did. Because gangsters like to talk about what they did. There's total glory for them and what they do. So they'll talk about it, especially to their girlfriends. And then what's been fruitful for us is when they beat their girlfriends and their girlfriends get mad for a period of time, and they'll tell law enforcement of what they told them, because there's a lot of domestic violence in gang relationships. But that's what happened here. She called a secret witness and let them know. We got the clothes that were seized at the homicide scene out of evidence, used new DNA techniques on those discarded items, and got the two defendants' DNA on those items that they used during the murder. And I tried that case about a year ago, and we got convictions, and they're doing life in prison.
Wow.
All because of a secret witness telephone call.
So one, I do remember that case just recently since I've been here, since it was prosecuted. I do remember hearing about that, and I couldn't believe it had been unsolved, and that one phone call really made all the difference to give you guys some information as to where to go next. So that was very cool from an outsider to see that work. I do want to talk about repeat offenders. Have you seen repeat offenders? And if so, what's that like once you see a case pop back up with the same person that maybe you've prosecuted before?
Well, gang members are not occasional lawbreakers. When you are allowed to be in a gang, however you get in, they just don't sit around and do video games all the time. Part of being in a gang is that you have to put in work for the gang. Putting in work for the gang is committing crimes. So you're going to see most likely gang members have a record, and that record is usually that of escalation. certain types of crimes, as I stated earlier, like you see graffiti and other types of crimes, and those crimes escalate because you really want to work yourself, gang members want to work their way up into the gang to more serious crimes and ultimately be allowed to be a shooter for the gang.
What does that mean?
Well, there are different roles that gang members have in gangs, especially some of the more organized gangs that, when we're looking at norteños, sureños as being very organized gangs and that report even to people in prison. The Nuestra Familia and the Mexican Mafia. This is a very organized, long-term type gang members, so they're very organized. But they have different roles. Some are drug dealers, some are burglars, and some are shooters. And being a shooter and then ultimately an OG, one of the older gang members, is the ultimate prestige within the gang.
When you're saying shooters, though, does that mean with a firearm or does that mean making calls?
Oh, no. Shooting with a gun.
Okay.
Doing a walk-up shooting or a drive-by shooting. That's what a shooter is called. They use a firearm, they aim it with intent to kill.
Wow. Okay. I just want to make that clear since I'm not familiar with the language. I want to make sure I understand. You've also talked about the escalation. How do we prevent that escalation from happening, or how do you think it could be prevented?
There's a number of ways that we look at. In gang suppression, we have prevention, intervention, and suppression. When it comes to me at the end, that's suppression. When it comes to law enforcement, when a crime's been committed, that's suppression. We have to do whatever it takes to suppress that particular act, and that's ultimate prosecution for as long as the law allows if someone takes someone's life. But there's also prevention of crimes, and then what we call intervention. When someone's in the gang, how do we get them out? So starting back with prevention, I mean, that deals with a family unit. A family unit and education and different things like that. But if we see someone that looks like they're getting involved in gangs, and we see that, which law enforcement can see, very often teachers, parents, there are certain things that can be done to intervene to get them out. Or even someone that's been to county jail, or even as an adult that hasn't done anything that is too terrible quite yet. They haven't been to prison yet. Oftentimes we really try to intervene and get them out through law enforcement and mentorship and probation and parole officers. A job helps. A job can help. And there are a lot of businesses around Kern County are what we call felon friendly, that they will hire felons. And so when we see something, depending on where it is in that escalation angle, then there are different resources that we try to get them out.
And you've talked a little bit about the parents as well, sometimes having the conversation with you and feeling that guilt that maybe they could have done something earlier on. Have they expressed specifics, or have you seen things or believe things that specifically could be done if a parent right now maybe has a teenager or something who's starting to slip?
We have been trying to have schools and then law enforcement, and they do a good job, and go into the schools or even have parent nights to educate parents about what they should be looking for. If you see your kid, I mean, I don't know that they call them this anymore, but folders or peaches, and they're scribbling 13, 13, 13, 14, 14, that kind of stuff, that's graffiti. That's gang graffiti. And if you see that and you think, why has my kid got 13 carved in his bedpost? Because he's either a gang member or he wants to be a gang member. That's why. So we want to be able to help educate parents early on. I mean, we used to go after the freshmen in high school. Now we're really looking at 5th and 6th graders of trying to help parents. Where we have a particular problem that we're really trying to do a better job is some of our immigrants who come here, who work in the fields. And they work in the fields, and even if it's a 2-parent home, but they're gone all day from dark in the morning till at night, and their kids are left alone a bit. And so they're not necessarily being able to watch them. These are families that have good morals. They're, church people. They do not want their children to be gang members, but they're not home. And so we want them to seek out, if they have to make a living, and they're trying to do the best they can in chasing the American dream, but they have to be able to reach out for help, either through mentorship, neighbors, or this or that, because you cannot take your eyes off your kids.
Some of the things that we've come across as far as law enforcement, as we we contact these juveniles who are dressing as gangsters, who have the graffiti. Some may even have tattoos. If they're under 18, we call the parents usually, and they come out and they're like, we're charging him with the gang enhancement for whatever crime. My son's not a gang member. I was like, yes, he is. Look at him. I was like, he just admitted. He's like, no, he's not. So we get those parents that deny that he is a gangster, and it's very difficult. And we had a guest earlier, Stephanie Fierros, who was like, she didn't know the signs. She denied he was a gangster until, unfortunately, it was too late, where her son was murdered. How do we get there to teach these parents, other than schools or anything else? Like, how do we reach out to them if there's somebody denying that their son's a gangster or some daughter's a gangster?
I think it's a big problem. There's a little bit of an anti-police sentiment going on, and so people aren't going to react to us, law enforcement, perhaps in the way they would have years ago. If somebody had come to my mother and said that your daughter is doing such and such, she would take them at their word, and I'd be in trouble. So you have a culture change that people are not as willing to do that. I get parents still, why are you prosecuting my kid? My kid didn't do anything wrong. Do you know the facts? They can sit through the whole trial and still have this kind of attitude. So we really have to work on that. We, of course, don't want to charge and convict people who haven't committed crimes. We certainly have enough business, as it is, to do what we do. So we don't want that. So, but of course, people are going to have to be honest about that. And I think as in cities, we really have to accept that we have issues. We talked about the history of gangs. One of the reasons that we really didn't start doing gang enhancements, and I know when it was the 1999 Casa Loma Park shooting in Bakersfield, where we really started looking at gang enhancements, is because a lot of time government officials don't want to accept what's going on in their community because of either, commerce or reputation or whatever. They don't want to accept that they are really in the spot that they're in. And that's what happened in Bakersfield, that it really, government officials just didn't really want to say we got gangs here. And so I think we have to take a look at ourselves and accept that and know that we've got a problem in Kern County. We've got a problem, and let's solve. But why don't you, Joe Public, be part of the solution? And that's where we have to make sure that we invite everyone to come to the table and help. If there's an issue here or there or whatever, we want to know about it, because we're all in this together and we do really care about your kids.
That's kind of what I feel Delano went through, because when I said they would form a team, they would call it the POP team, problem-oriented policing. And then when they created the gang unit, it was a special enforcement unit. So they wouldn't say necessarily it's a gang unit until now. Now it's a gang unit because now it is a problem. So I feel like once you accept the fact that there is a problem, now you can start attacking the way it needs to be attacked.
And that's kind of the same, I think, what you were trying to say with parents as well,
Right.
accepting it even though it may be hard to swallow and saying, how can we fix this? So the next question I would have then is, what can the community do? What can parents do to help collectively make this change?
Why do kids go into gangs? That's what we have to look at. One of the reasons that I've heard is that they look at being in a gang as a family, and it is supplying something to them that they're not getting at home, whatever that is, or not getting at school. Maybe they're not the star athlete. Maybe they're not, something that it brings them self-esteem. So we have to help those kids, look at those kids and figure out, what is it that they need? Maybe a little bit more academic help, or that coach on the team that makes them feel good about themselves. So we have to continue to strive to do better when it comes to our children. And mentorship. We're seeing a lot more mentorship. If you want to volunteer to be a mentor to a child who maybe is growing up in a single parent household, that is becoming more and more popular to be able, or more prevalent to do that. We have quite a bit of that. And just, I don't know, when somebody wants to go into a gang, we got to be able to tell them, look, this is your choice. You're moving in the wrong direction. You got to choose a law-abiding path, because let me tell you the truth about what your future holds. The future holds for a gang member, somebody that's an active gang member, one of two possibilities: prison or death. And if you don't die, and you go to prison, you think that you're going to have glory with your gang members. They're not even going to put money on your books. When you're out of the picture, they don't care about you. You're not going to get phone calls, money in your books. You're just going to be lost because then your spot's going to be filled with somebody else that's just a little bit younger. So that's something I think that children really need to know. There's no glory in this. There's no glory, and it is wrong.
I also want to talk about by the time a case gets to you, and let's say maybe it involves a young adult, so 18, 19, 20, do you think at that point, since it is suppression, is it too late for that individual to break the cycle?
Well, I will tell you that nothing is ever too late, and no individual is ever beyond help or redemption. I am a Christian, and I do believe that everyone can choose their own path, and there is grace in a number of things. And I think here in Delano, we have a lot of resources. We have a pastor who I think very highly of that does a lot of good work. So is an 18-year-old that gets in trouble for a gang crime lost or beyond help? Absolutely not. And it depends on the crime, though. It certainly, if an 18-year-old who unfortunately chooses to kill is not going to get any, shall we say, love or mercy from law enforcement or from me. But an 18-year-old who has a gun, and he shouldn't have a gun, or commits anything less of really hurting someone, has a lot of options. They have a lot of options. You know, they're going to have to be accountable for their crime. But there's probation, parole, and people within those departments who truly want people to rehabilitate.
Now, as far as the parents who are, we discussed it just briefly here, making sure that they're not in denial over what may be happening if somebody comes and says, hey, you really need to pay attention to your child. You brought up, sometimes you'll call parents out and say your child is outright saying they're a gang member, but they don't want to address it. What would you say to parents, though? How do they take a hold of this and get their kid back before it's too late, before they do start to escalate?
Ask for help. Don't do it alone if you're ill-equipped to do what you think you can do. Because sometimes kids, 15, 16-year-old kids are as large as adults, and they're formidable. But do the best you can. Keep your eyes on them. Make sure that those kids know that you love them. You love them more than anything in the world, and their future success is what you care about most. But reach out to the schools, reach out to church, reach out to the Delano Police Department, reach out for help. And there are a lot of good people that would want to help.
How do you think in general we do break the cycle of gang violence, though? Where do you think it stems from, and how do we break that?
I don't know that I necessarily agree it's a cycle, because when you say cycle, or if you're saying it goes multi-generational, from father to son, or if you mean they're in gangs and they just can continue to escalate. We have some gang members who, it's multi-generational. That's the hardest. Mom was a gang member, dad was a gang member, uncles, brothers, sisters, grandparents, and they have a long history and relationship with the California Department of Corrections. That's hard because it's culture and philosophy. But then you get kids whose parents have no clue about anything like that. And in my opinion, that's a little bit easier because the parents don't want that. They want, again, their kids to achieve the American dream. So I think it just really kind of depends on the success of what we can do, and the methods are probably different for different people.
Is there anything about what you've seen when it comes to gangs that you want people to be aware of, maybe something they don't think of?
Gang violence is the number one public safety problem in Kern County, and in particular in Delano. I think we all have to do our part. No one is immune from it. If you don't think gang violence can affect you because you're not a part of a gang, you're wrong. You go to the grocery store and a gang member can rob you. You go to Valley Plaza Mall, you can get caught in the crossfire. I don't say that because I want people to be afraid, but I think people need to be aware that it is not just our problem, their problem, it's everyone's problem. And I think we should do everything that we can do, even if it's just coming to jury duty. People say, well, what can I do? I live in, let's say in Bakersfield, I live on the west side. I don't have gangs in my neighborhood. You'd be surprised. You might. But they can certainly come to your neighborhood. And the number one problem that we have in Bakersfield are residential burglaries, where people break in and steal your guns. So, but I would say, if you're not comfortable being a mentor or getting involved one-on-one, then I think what you have to do is support law enforcement, because their efforts are truly motivated for the right reasons. And also go to jury duty. Don't come into jury duty and not want to serve. Listen and serve on a jury duty and be fair and listen to evidence and become educated, even if it's just as a juror.
If people could take away one thing from you today when it comes to gang violence in Delano and in Kern County, what would you hope they take away?
That it's real, that it's deadly, and we got to help these kids. They have to know their future is so bright, but if they choose the wrong path, their future is bleak. And we can't ignore it. We can't act like it doesn't happen. We have to be optimistic, but it is a real thing that we need to accept.
Thank you.
All right. This was episode 5 of Breaking the Cycle of Gang Violence. Special thank you to our special guest, Cynthia Zimmer, Kern County District Attorney. Special thank you to our host, Jessica Harrington. And I'm Corporal Madrigal. We'll see you next week.